everybody. My name is Jason Piercey, and this is Out of the Fog. We continue to bring you all of the content that we can from the privacy and the safety of our own homes. This is Volunteer Week, and this is actually a really good time to do a shout out to everybody who volunteers for Rogers TV, because I don't know if that's common knowledge, but we're run almost exclusively by volunteers, other than a couple of key people, and you all know who you are. Thank you so much. So on this episode, we're going to talk to our very own co-host for Out of the Fog, Melissa Rowe. She is a honorary chairperson for Volunteer Week here in Newfoundland and Labrador this year. So she has some things to say, and of course she's big on volunteerism. And also Penelope Rowe, who's the CEO of the Community Sector Council. And we had a really good conversation because I'll be very honest, I didn't know everything that the Community Sector Council does. And it's a remarkable organization, and Miss Penelope Rowe does a lot of good work there, and volunteer work is a big part of it. Volunteer Week is a big part of it, and I'm excited about that. But first, here's a few words with our very own Melissa Rowe.
So I just wanted to say that I am so delighted and honored to be an honorary co-chair of Volunteer Week this year. And I wanted to start with talking about the theme. So this year's theme of applauding volunteers. I really like that because I think applause is something that's too often reserved for people performing in the public eye. Theater acts, rock stars, politicians even. But we don't so readily clap our hands for members of the community making a difference off the stage. Newfoundland and Labrador's volunteers work tirelessly to affect progress in our communities, and they give their time in support of causes and programs they believe in and ask for nothing in return. And for that, we owe them such great thanks, and I think that we should applaud them and cheer them on and roll out the red carpet, and that's what this week is all about. I was really fortunate to get an early exposure to volunteerism through my parents, who diligently and enthusiastically coached sports teams, were Girl Guide leaders and scouting leaders, and also volunteered in less formal ways, especially in our family's case, welcoming newcomers to the province. And so perhaps as a result, I picked up on this and was afforded invigorating volunteer opportunities through the Duke of Edinburgh program and through student councils. And then I took that through to my university years, where I often found that I learned more about political science and about law and about real-world applications of those fields through volunteering than I did in the classroom. And I still find that to be the case. So as chair of Equal Voice, the Newfoundland Labrador chapter of Equal Voice, which, as Penny mentioned, is an organization dedicated to encouraging more women to run for politics, I'm surrounded by people, from seasoned politicians to youth who are engaged in the political process, who freely give their time to help other women and increase representation in our democratic institutions. And so is it Kristen who's interested in politics? So the go-getters, I'm coming for you. You're going to be on my committee anytime. And actually yesterday we had a sharing circle on women's empowerment held at Government House. And as always with that organization, I was really truly moved by how the willingness of so many women in our community to give their time, not only as participants, but as facilitators, as note takers, as planners, and all giving up their time freely so they could discuss concrete ways that we can advance women in leadership in this province and also the economic security of women. I've also come to appreciate the importance of volunteerism in this province through my role as co-host of Out of the Fog on Rogers TV. The show is actually made and produced mostly by volunteers and very often features volunteers and community organizations as guests. In fact, for those of you who know me, I'm a big political geek, and so when people say, what's your favorite thing about the show, I think they always expect I'm going to say that it's talking to the cabinet ministers, the opposition leaders, or the city councillors. But in fact, it's actually speaking with, a number of you are in this room today, but people speaking on behalf of community organizations and volunteers. I've learned that it takes a lot of dedication and volunteerism to bring those stories to the air. And as Penny mentioned, I've also recently taken on a new role as the honorary chair of Big Brothers Big Sisters' largest fundraising campaign, Bold for Kids' Sake. But the real work at that organization is clearly done by those that dedicate their time and energy to being big brothers and sisters. And over the past few weeks in my involvement with that organization, it's just been incredible to learn about the impact that that gift of time is making on the lives of our youth. And finally, as a practicing lawyer, our time is what we sell. So you can insert your own lawyer joke there. But we're taught to value and account for our time. And I'm constantly amazed by the amount of time my friends and colleagues dedicate to volunteerism. And I bet if many of you in the room tracked your time every 6 minutes the way lawyers do, you'd probably be blown away by how much time you're giving every year as well. And so I'm fortunate to work for an employer, Benson Buffett Law Firm, that understands and appreciates volunteers. And so they understand when I have to run out the door at 5 o'clock on the dot to make a board meeting or print off posters for a fundraiser. Actually, maybe don't tell them that. That between us. But so I just wanted to give a shout out, in addition to the volunteers, to the families, the employers, and the organizations that foster volunteerism, because we can't just applaud volunteers without applauding all of them as well. But most importantly, this April 19th to 25th, as we celebrate National Volunteer Week, remember to clap your hands, or maybe even just send out a clapping emoji on the Twitter system, and to support our volunteers, because they are the rock stars of our community. So thank you very much, and thanks for having me, and looking forward to our week together.
This is Rogers TV.
COVID-19 is changing our world and our lives, and it's changing by the hour. Watch CPAC throughout this crisis for unfiltered live news conferences, connecting you with political leaders and health experts 24 hours a day. The vital information you need on TV, online, on social, so you can see clearly how you are impacted day by day. CPAC. See for yourself.
This is Rogers TV.
Welcome back to Out of the Fog. Let me introduce you to somebody pretty special. This is Penelope Rowe. What a beautiful name Penelope is. Penelope is the CEO of the Community Sector Council here in Newfoundland and Labrador. Welcome, Penelope.
Thank you. Wonderful to have this opportunity, Jason, to join you on Out of the Fog. And thank you to Rogers, which is always so supportive of Volunteer Week and so accustomed to working with volunteers.
Yeah, we very much are. And I don't know if everybody would know it or not, but I mean, it's a little bit different now because I'm literally filming this in my bedroom. But normally when we're in the studio and there's 5 or 6 people around doing the, in the control room or on the floor, they're almost all volunteers. So we're really big on the work that you do surrounding Volunteer Week. So it was important to us to be able to have this conversation.
And I think that over the years, Rogers has been really supportive of Volunteer Week in particular. So delighted to be chatting with you this morning.
Yeah, so before we talk so much about Volunteer Week, can we talk a little bit about what the Community Sector Council is, what it does?
The Community Sector Council, Newfoundland and Labrador, is an organization which I think, put in the simplest way, tries to provide capacity for other voluntary and nonprofit organizations. We convene people, we conduct research, we provide all kinds of training, we support volunteers. So for example, a lot of our work is around research, speaking to people. What is it the community sector organizations, voluntary nonprofit organizations, would find useful to them? So we do a lot of work around the province. We do a lot of work with people here in the St. John's area where we do governance training, for example, for those board members who are responsible for managing organizations. So we are what we would consider a capacity building, a convening, a connecting organization. So a lot of our work is directly with nonprofit organizations, but we have great relationships with our governments, municipal, federal, and provincial. And we work also quite significantly with individuals who are interested in volunteering or building their skills.
So if a not-for-profit opened up and they were required to have a board, even if was just a governance board or whatever it was, and it's a lot of rookies involved in this situation, they could reach out to you to figure out how to go through that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that we love. We actually have what we call a warm line, and the telephone number is 753-9860. And people can call up here and ask us any kind of question they want to about running their organization, and somebody will always get back to them. But one of the fairly regular and consistent questions we get, in fact, I just had one this weekend: how do we form an organization? How do we get registered? How do we register as a charity, or how do we register with the provincial government? So those are the early steps. People may want to know how to create their bylaws, or how to, what are the responsibilities of people who serve on boards. I think a lot of people perhaps become enthusiastic about an issue or a mission, something that they really want to do in the community. When they start to formalize their organization, the board of directors actually becomes legally responsible, and they have fiduciary responsibilities. It is that board of directors that's responsible, for instance, for the financial management, for making sure all the papers are filed on time. So it's a fairly significant responsibility, and one that people are really very anxious to know more about. And that's one of the services that we can certainly provide, and do so frequently.
That's so fascinating to me, because a little while ago I was asked to sit on a board for a couple of different, one was a charity and one was not for profit, and I just have zero experience with it, and I got a lot going on, and between this and my real estate career, and I just felt like it wasn't something that I had enough exposure or education to be involved with. But I suppose now, knowing this, when we're allowed to go outside and play again, I might make a phone call to you guys and see if they're still interested in having me be a part of it.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's a really good point you raise when you think about it as you as an individual, and do you have time to actually get yourself well oriented? I know that, you know, typically people will reach out to their friends or their colleagues or other people in a community and say, join my board, there's not much to it. It'll only take an hour or two a month. Well, the hour or two a month might be correct, but the reality is that board collectively, and so individual board members as a collective, have a fundamental responsibility. And in fact, when you think about the community sector, as we call it here in our province, many of our volunteers are indeed these governance volunteers, these individuals who serve on the boards of directors. There would absolutely be no nonprofit organization unless there were people willing to step up and serve on the boards. So if you think of the Red Cross or St. John Ambulance or the Cancer Society or the Community Sector Council or some of our theatres around the province, all of those organizations are officially registered. They all have to have boards of directors. So none of those organizations, whether they're in tourism or recreation or sports or supporting the environment, could exist without those leadership volunteers. And they then would be in addition to all the other people who step up to volunteer in a whole variety of other ways.
So this is a really good time to transition, I suppose, to talk about Volunteer Week, because seeing the impact on larger organizations that people would not expect could very easily be governed entirely, like the entire board of directors manages and makes those decisions almost exclusively by volunteers. So I think now is a good time to talk about Volunteer Week and maybe talk about the role the Community Sector Council plays.
Well, Volunteer Week is a wonderful time each year, Jason, when we actually work really hard collectively as a community sector across the province to shine a light on our volunteers. I think every single one of us is touched every single day in our daily life. We benefit in some way by the act of an individual volunteer or voluntary organizations. So if you walk on a trail, if you go into a seniors program, if you're looking at programming for young people, or no matter what kind of activity, whether it's going to groups like the Y for recreation. All of these organizations are indeed nonprofits, all run by volunteers. So it's estimated that we have close to 50% of our population who are 15 years of age and older who actually step up to volunteer. And so it's not something that's peripheral to your life, it's something that is part of your everyday life. So I love to think about it with a picture of all of the voluntary organizations that impact and benefit our life. And if you remove each one at a time from that picture, by the time you're left, there's almost nothing in your community. So what we therefore know is that volunteers and their organizations are absolutely essential. In fact, they're central to community vibrancy, community well-being. And one of the other things that I think we're learning far more about now is how important these volunteers and the organizations that they are attached to are to the economy in our province.
Interesting.
And if you think about some of our smaller communities in particular, and think about what is central to those communities, whether it's a theatre group, whether it's a museum, whether it's a heritage group, whether it's a tourism group, these are all voluntary organizations in their structures. And they're absolutely fundamental to the economy. So if you think of a community where a theatre was started, for example, then all of a sudden there need to be restaurants, coffee shops, more bed and breakfasts or Airbnbs, more traffic coming in to purchase in stores. So we see the community sector as actually totally central to the economy and a significant part of the economic engine.
That makes, because of the spin-off, not so much because people hear the word volunteer and they think, well, no money, but the direct spin-off from that obviously turns into so much. And you've referenced volunteerism as essential to our community and to our economy. And I think essential is sort of a hot button issue right now because those who are non-essential aren't allowed to go to work. So how much does the physical distancing and the healthcare pandemic ban what kind of a role is that playing in you trying to adapt and still go through Volunteer Week in the same kind of way?
Well, for some organizations that provide direct hands-on service, obviously the adjustment that they have to make is very significant. They really have to figure out how they can meet the needs of their clients. For the Community Sector Council in particular, we obviously can use technology and telephones and the written word and email perhaps a little bit more readily. But for Volunteer Week itself, it has made a fundamental shift, quite obviously, because typically during this week every year, people have parties, they have receptions, they have big celebrations, they bring all the volunteers from all the organizations together in their local communities. And for many years now, CSC has been offering small grants, $100 each, to legal communities, smaller organizations, to support these celebrations. So clearly this year, we can't do that. So we're trying to find other ways to enable people to applaud their volunteers, and that is the theme of Volunteer Week, applauding volunteers. They can do that by joining our Facebook, which is Volunteer Week NL. They can join us on Twitter at CSCNL. They can join our Instagram account. And we're actually trying to challenge organizations on Facebook to tweet about and to talk about on Facebook, to make posts about their volunteers. So there are other ways we can celebrate our volunteers this year, but we have to do it virtually and we have to do it in new and creative ways. And we're just amazed, since we started promoting this yesterday, the thousands of posts and the thousands of people who we've reached out to. And over the course of the week, we're hoping to have thousands of posts. So we can
you might want to use those $100 grants to pay for people's internet bills now.
Well, now there you go. That's a thought, isn't it? If they haven't got an internet. But you know something, you've raised a really important point, Jason, because if anything is becoming evident during this pandemic is the divide between people who have good Wi-Fi, whose Wi-Fi is spotty, or people who have good equipment and people who have no equipment, or people who have old equipment, which is not very adaptable. And I'm quite amazed when I'm speaking to volunteers around the province who say, my laptop is 20 years old. Now I can't have somebody come into my house to fix it. So this is a really important point for volunteers, because nothing is ever going to go back to being entirely the way it was before. So I think this way we're adjusting to new technologies will become more embedded, and we will have to shift more to this. So I'm thinking that over the next week or so, this is an issue that the Community Sector Council, Newfoundland and Labrador, may want to fully address with some of our corporate partners, how we can actually improve the ability, particularly of smaller organizations and individuals who are connected as volunteers, and perhaps children as well, and how we can actually step up to start providing more equipment for these people.
Fantastic.
One of the other things you talked about, the adjustment, which is quite interesting, is that typically in many of our communities, a lot of our volunteers are older, and they're in the demographic who've been told to stay home, really keep a physical distance.
Well, they're the most vulnerable, but they're oftentimes, not always, but most vulnerable, and also a little bit less experienced with the use of technology in order to get that socialization.
Absolutely. And so we're losing the benefit of the hands-on kinds of activities that they used to perform, whether it's in food banks or friendly visiting or whatever. So one of the good news stories coming out of the pandemic, I think, is that we're seeing a surge of younger volunteers, younger people who are stepping up, perhaps not in the confines necessarily of an organization, but to do individual acts of kindness. And so it is that kind of new volunteer, that surge, that will be important. It will also be very important to figure out how we can get back to that older group of volunteers, people who really want to be involved in their communities. But I think that the really big message for Volunteer Week is that this is about a time of celebrating. It's about a time when people can thank volunteers. I mean, we can send people emails, some people. Other people, there's no reason why we can't write a handwritten thank you note, have it delivered to their door, put it in the mail, pick up the telephone and say, thank you very much for all you do for our organization and for our community. So there are all kinds of ways that people can say thank you, even if they can't have their usual receptions.
That feels like a really good time for me to thank you, both for coming here and being on the show, and also for the work that you do with Volunteer Week and, of course, with the Community Sector Council here in Newfoundland and Labrador. So Penelope Lowe, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we will be right back after this break.
Thank you, Jason.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
All right, girls.
Mom, you said it's played again.
Workplace injuries hurt the most at home.
Most people living with it don't even know they have it.
I'm Alex Lifeson. My family, like many of yours, has dealt with the conditions that cause kidney disease. If you have diabetes, high blood pressure, or a family member with kidney disease, you are at risk. If you are overweight or over 50, you are at risk. And certain ethnic groups are also at higher risk. Please talk to your family doctor and have your kidney function checked regularly.
Welcome back to Out of the Fog. This has been a good one. It's so interesting to think how far-reaching volunteerism is in our communities, and not just the amount of people who are directly involved in volunteering their own time, but the amount of spin-off that goes through the rest of our economy. After the interview, myself and Penelope had a conversation about maybe doing another chat, one that talks about the economic impact of volunteerism and not-for-profit and charity, because it reaches out so far, so deep, and does so much for our community that I think it's definitely worth it. So right before we say goodnight or goodbye, or however we want to look at this COVID house restraint episode of Out of the Fog, one last very sincere, very, very straight from the bottom of my mushy, gushy, wine-soaked heart to our volunteers at Out of the Fog and our other episodes of Rogers TV. We owe you a debt of gratitude. Thank you very, very much for everything that you do. Nothing we do would be possible without you. We love you. Thank you. And we'll see you guys next week.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Hi everyone, it's Kim and Mabel here at Wink in Churchill Square. And I know we are going through such a really difficult time as a province right now. So I really just wanted to send you all of our love and support and positive vibes. We are all in this together, and I know we will come out on the other side.
Etienne Cartier, the work of uniting Canada was as vast as the country itself. First, he won over Quebec.
Union is the only way forward.
No, Monsieur Cartier. Confederation will cost French Canadians their nationality.
Monsieur, together we will form a political nationality independent of our origins.
Diversity will be Canada's strength.
Then he fought for Manitoba.
The Northwest has formed a government under Louis Riel. We will not